All right, eighth graders. So up to this point, we've been talking about perfect squares, which we know if I square a number, let me get my pen here. So let's just say 2 squared. Well, 2 squared, sorry, it's my dog. So 2 squared is 4. We know 3 squared is 9. 4 squared will give me 16, so on and so forth. So we've talked in the previous videos about how these are called perfect squares. All right. So now, if I were to tell you on a separate note that I have 2x plus 3x, how can I simplify that? Well, you know I can simplify that by adding them together and getting 5x. Same with if I said 3y times 2y. Well, that would be 6y squared, right? So we know we can simplify variables. Well, today we're going to be simplifying square roots. So there are 2 different strategies. In this video, we're going to work with strategy 1. So hear me out on this, okay? Your first goal for strategy 1 is to find the greatest perfect square that is a factor of the number inside the square root symbol. You're going to rewrite the number inside the square root symbol as the product of the greatest perfect square in the other factor. You're going to take the square root of the perfect square, and remember that when you take the square root of the perfect square, it's no longer inside. So put a star by this, because when you take a square root of a perfect square, okay, you no longer have it inside the square root symbol. You're going to continue this process until you can no longer find a perfect square other than one that is a factor of the number inside the square root symbol. So you might be saying, whoa, what? Watch what happens, okay? So if I have the square root of 8, I know that is not a perfect square, right? So what I do is I know that that can become the square root of 4 times 2, because 4 times 2 is 8. Now I'm going to break that apart like they did here, to the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. Well, are either of those numbers perfect squares? You should be saying yes. 4 is a perfect square. So the square root of 4, when I simplify that, is 2. So that brings us up to this point right here where it says take the square root of the perfect square. So what we just did is we took the square root of 4, okay, and it was 2. So 2 is no longer inside the square root symbol. It's on the outside. And then what I'm left with is this 2 here. Okay, let's look at this one down below. Square root of 40. Well, when I look at this, I know the square root of 40 can also be written as the square root of 4 times the square root of 10, because 4 times 10 is 40. Are either of those numbers a perfect square? Yes, they are. 4 is. So 4, the square root of 4 is 2, and I'm left with this root 10, because the square root of 10, okay, is not a perfect square. What about this next one? Well, they did 32. The square root of 32 can be broken down to multiple things, but whoever created this video decided, or not video, the notes, decided to make it the square root of 16 times the square root of 2. Now, why do you think they chose 16 and 2? Well, 16 is a perfect square. So if I were to think about the square root of 16, that can become the square root of 4, because that's 4, root 2. 4 root 2, final answer, because we're leaving this 2 underneath the bracket since it's not a perfect square. Let's go ahead and scroll down a little bit further. 45. They chose 9 times 5. So if I do this, it's the square root of 9 times the square root of 5. Well, are either of these perfect squares? Yeah, 9 becomes 3, and I'm left with the square root of 5. Okay, go ahead and scroll down. Let's choose, I'm going to do 2, and then I want you to do 4 more before you go on to the next step. So let's look at 50. Well, I know that 50 can be the square root of 25 times the square root of 2. Are either of these perfect squares? Yes. Square root of 25 is 5. Square root of 2 is going to stay there. So I get 5 root 2. What about 200? Well, 200 can be the square root of 100 times the square root of 2. Are either of those perfect squares? Yes. Which one can I break down further? Well, I can break down 100 further. So 100 will become 10 root 2. All right, go ahead and try 4 more on this page for me. Actually, let's do 3. So we've got 1, 2, and 3. Go ahead and try these. So what you're looking for is a perfect square that you can multiply by to help yourself out to simplify these.